Okay, I am calling to order the March 19th, 6 p.m. meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Can we all stand and do the pledge, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we do roll call, Lori?
Chairman Aton, Vice Chairman Childs,
Here.
Secretary Grant,
Here.
Member Faison,
Here.
Member Garrod,
Here.
Member Scully,
Here.
Member Gillen, Alternate Member Findler, Alternate Member Rogers.
Okay, we have a quorum. And next item is the approval of minutes. Is there any discussion on the minutes or a motion? Member Garrod.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion by Garrod and seconded by Secretary Grant. We just do a voice vote for that? We just, yeah. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion carries for the approval of minutes. The quasi judicial confirmation procedures, please, Chelsea.
Yes, thank you. Tonight's meeting agenda provides the following notice. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card to be heard on that agenda item and sign the oath contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to the procedures adopted in Resolution Number 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you. Next item is petitions and requests from the public present. So if you have anything to say to the commission on anything that's not on the agenda, you can come up and speak. You don't need a card. Is anyone interested? No. Okay. Next item is old business. We don't have any. New business, 9A, the Verona Village. Eddie?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Item 9A, Verona Village C final plat. For the commission's consideration, the bonds for the final plat were not received in time for your consideration to be added to the agenda. So we're asking tonight for you to table this item to the next meeting.
Okay. Is there any discussion or a motion from anyone to table this?
I move that we go ahead and table this until the next meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion to table it in a second. Roll call vote?
Member Garrod,
Yes.
Member Scully,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Childs,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Faison.
Yes.
And for the record, the next meeting is April 2nd.
April 2nd. All right, thank you. All right, next item is 9B, the rezoning of Wendover Farms Cheney Highway.
Thank you again. This is item 9B, rezoning number 1, 2025, Wendover Farms Cheney Highway, which begins on page 25 of 67 of tonight's agenda packet. The applicant is requesting a rezoning to remove the concept plan and conditions adopted with rezoning ordinances number 27, 2008 and 29, 2008 in the Regional Commercial Zoning District. The property lies south of State Road 50, Cheney Highway, west of Wendover Way and Wendover Farms of Titusville residential subdivision, east of I-95, and north of land currently utilized as a hobby remote-controlled aircraft park. The current zoning on the property was approved in several actions. The regional commercial zoning was approved by ordinances numbers 27, 2008 and 29, 2008. The current regional commercial zoning ordinances were adopted based on a concept plan for a commercial development and included several conditions that require a development agreement and submittals related to wetland and wildlife preservation. I'll also read on page 28 of your agenda packet the general information under staff analysis. The applicant did not submit a concept plan for review. Therefore, the rezoning was evaluated based on the most intense uses and development potential allowed on the property. The existing concept plan proposed a unified commercial retail strip center on the subject property and the neighboring property to the north. The plan illustrated 9 commercial retail buildings with significant ancillary parking areas. The conditions required the submittal of a development agreement, screening and buffering at the southeast perimeter, compliance with state and federal wetland and wildlife regulations, a habitat management plan, a St. John's Water Management District mitigation permit, distribution of handicap parking spaces, and the submittal of a traffic study to both Brevard County and Florida Department of Transportation. Removal of the binding concept plan and conditions will permit the applicant to develop under the standard RC zoning. Next, I'll point you to page 55. 55 is the concept plan that was adopted with the ordinances that approved the zoning on the property. Wanted to point out the horizontal line on the concept plan that separates the parking areas. The property to the north of that line was not included, was not owned by the applicant of this application that applied the zoning to the property. And so the concept plan included areas that were not owned by the applicant at the time. This is illustrated on page 59. In the ordinance, there were 2 ordinances that placed the regional commercial zoning on the subject property. And you'll notice that the portion to the north is also zoned regional commercial, but has a different ordinance number. It's ordinance number 4098. And that ordinance on that property to the north does not include a concept plan. Last, I'll point the commission to page 29. Page 29 is the list of conditions that were applied through the zoning ordinance that's applied to the property. And I'll just go through the conditions and read them to you. So the first is a binding concept plan, and that's a plan that illustrates 4 driveways onto Windover Way and 1 ingress-only driveway from State Road 50. It is questionable whether the FDOT will permit a driveway from the I-95 off-ramp into the development as illustrated in the plan. The parcels are owned by separate entities. Removal of the concept plan could result in separate developments. The next condition was the development agreement. A development agreement is a contract between the property owner and the city, and it outlines the conditions and benchmarks under which a development may proceed. Developers typically find these advantageous because it would freeze the land development regulations at the time, so that as the development was constructed, if ordinance changes were to occur, they would not apply to the property. Screening and buffering at the southeast perimeter of the residential, or from residential. The city's code currently requires a 10-foot landscape buffer and screening of mechanical equipment, dumpsters, and loading areas. This condition is unnecessary. Compliance with state and federal wetland and wildlife regulations. This is already required by state and federal regulations, so this condition is also unnecessary. A habitat management plan. This applies only if required by state and federal law, so this condition is unnecessary. A St. John's Water Management District mitigation permit. This is already required by state regulations. This condition is unnecessary. Distribution of handicap parking spaces. This is already required by the state regulations. This condition is also unnecessary. And last, submittal of a traffic study to both Brevard County and FDOT. The county and FDOT do not review traffic studies associated with site plans in the city of Titusville, and so this condition is also unnecessary. With that, I think that's all that I have for you, so if you have any questions.
So you want to have questions? Member Faison.
Didn't this come before us before with a different plan?
I believe so, yes, sir.
And the community showed up, and then they talked about how they were concerned about traffic patterns leaving this property. But now they're asking to remove that previous plan and to just let it be open for now until they decide what they want to do with it.
Correct. The previous application included a new concept plan, and that action was not ultimately adopted by city council.
Okay. And so again, as you've already stated, that if we do remove this, it kind of makes it even more difficult to develop in the future because then of the two parcels being owned by two different owners, correct? Potentially.
If the concept plan were to remain on the property, it would make it more difficult if they could not comply. Basically, the city would not be able to issue a permit unless they had shown that they were building it to the concept plan, which doesn't seem feasible if they don't currently own both portions of the property.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Garad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eddie, I sent you an email and I asked a question, and I have to be frank that that last comment on the submittal of traffic study to Brevard County and FDOT, when we looked at this property's proposed development plan some months ago, I pointed out that that's a precarious intersection formed by an access ramp from the exit for the interstate, and they propose to have access to it. What I mentioned in my email was 17 years have gone by since this development agreement binding plan was initiated, and for 17 years, we still don't know what FDOT's going to say about a principal driveway, because in the reading I see of the codes, and I also want to comment, and Chelsea, this was for your attention, we received an email from one of the citizens, and they pointed out something that I hopefully can clarify this, that under the zoning code is a aggregated development proposal based on the binding letter. If they lost the driveway proposal, then all their access comes from a local road. I seem to recall there was some potential flexibility considerations that this road, by having an intersection getting out to the principal arterial road, otherwise conform to the zoning standards that say, for this zoning district, you have to have frontage on this arterial road. We've crossed that bridge several times recently, and each time I'm puzzled how you have a statement of fact that says you shall have this, but we kind of don't really shall. We kind of interpret it. So in my opinion, if you remove the driveway from the access to the arterial road, which in fact is access to an exit ramp, and that is the only criteria by which that zoning district should have been granted, you're creating a nonconformity. Actually, you're creating a violation of the zoning by separating the pieces which were presented for qualification, in my opinion. And the second reason I have that opinion is because if you bifurcate the property again, the principal piece under consideration doesn't conform to the requirement as pointed out in the letter that was sent to us. So in my view of this, and I mentioned that at the last meeting about how Titusville is presenting these projects through these binding development agreements or binding plans, but they're somewhat ambiguous or vague and they're subject to change. And I pointed out where using plan development zoning would be the same contractual relationship, you would present that. It serves the same purpose, perhaps even as it arose by another name, it still arose. It's a binding plan. So in this case, how does staff view the separation of the property, causing the proponent's parcel segregated from the qualifier frontage on an arterial road, no access to an arterial road? The zoning district would be in violation. It could be lightly put in nonconformity, but to me, if we constitute an action, you create it, and you constitute a violation. And that part I can't really support, obviously, for me. And I'm interested in how that all plays out, where the staff supports the rezoning, but recognizing, if I'm correct, that it doesn't conform.
Sure. So as mentioned before, the ordinance that's on the property currently did not bind the property to the north. It included the concept plan, but the ordinances, if you see the adopted zoning map, does not include the property to the north because the property owner was not party to that application. So at the time, City Council approved changing just the zoning on the tonight's subject property to regional commercial. As mentioned also before, there is a recorded access easement to the north to State Road 50 that could potentially propose connection to the property to the north and to State Road 50. The other areas in the area on page 48, This is the future land use map of the subject property and the surrounding area. And you'll find that there are other examples of properties that have the commercial high intensity that allow these types of uses that don't have access onto Cheney Highway directly, such as the wedge-shaped portion to the northeast that's on Wendover Way, and further to the northeast, the Home Depot parcel that has access onto Wendover Trail and Ronald McNair Way. And so there are a couple examples, but really this is an example where it helps that the policy is to cluster commercial uses in this node. And so we feel that it's consistent.
And I appreciate that response. I guess my puzzlement is at the onset of this plan, when it was reviewed, there was obviously discussion way before my time about accessing the property, and the question remains, what does FDOT say about the drawing? And I guess I understood from what you said, the presentation of this binding plan was done in such a way that the appendage parcel, because they had an easement for access, was really just illustration, and that the easement for access was going to be in your pocket to go and say, I need to get a driveway because I have an easement. But it's still 17 years later, an unanswered question. And the last time, which just happened to be this morning, that I drove through the intersection that would obviously be developed if this property developed from that access point, it's a nightmare. And I think I remember having a long discussion about that, where you're going to have stacking movements turning left. And I mean, to me, the transportation access to this site is 100% critical. And to cast zoning to which the binding plan shows a way that you can conform to the zoning district standard minimum width on an arterial road, conform to the zoning district standard that you've got access to the arterial road by easement, albeit still serves the same purpose. A traffic engineer will design it so it's safe, but what if FDOT says no? 17 years into the plan, it holds the plan and potential development based on that zoning district at bay, and no one has an answer. And that's why in my email I asked the question, and I think I asked the question on the project the last time we looked at the site, has anybody got a transportation engineer to examine this? Has somebody reached out to FDOT and said, this is a critical site, we need to have at least a review based on what you will or won't do with that access through an exit ramp? I mean, I've never seen something like that. Purposely, I went and looked at the access onto parcels where I guess it's the restaurant on the west side, Cracker Barrel. And you can see where what's happened is everything's been pushed to that intersecting road. And in this case, if that's what happens, one, you don't meet the criteria for direct access on an arterial. Two, you impact the existing poorly maintained road, and all due respect to people who live in Wendover, poorly maintained rural street section. And I remember talking at the last time about how traffic patterns, and there was a little bit of, discussion with the applicant at the time, that all the cars would not go that way. And I said, there's no way that's not going to become an access route because it takes you to a controlled intersection. This is not a controlled intersection. So everybody's trying to turn left, do U-turns, get back on the interstate and go into the site, and there's no control other than the drivers. People who don't want to get in that kind of event are going to take the alternative route out to the controlled intersection where you exit across the street to Walmart. So my whole point, my concern, and it's legitimate, I think, where are we with FDOT? And I know staff, engineering staff, they can get at least a review by FDOT. They don't refuse to tell you that. They'll say, we need to see it engineered, or no, there's no way we're going to give you access into a ramp on the off-ramp. And I'm real uncomfortable with a history that long that the dangling participle is still the unanswered question, and that's the principal issue, accessing arterial highway. That's just tough. And has staff or does staff reach out to FDOT in situations like this?
So FDOT will review it if it's impacting the state road system. But I believe the applicant has had conversation with FDOT that might give some light to the
Sure.
requirements.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I talked to Christy on Monday, and I think I asked, what I asked her was that It's just the, if there was another concept plan that was submitted as a replacement, because we had a binding concept plan before, but now we just want to get rid of it, and there's no new binding contract or binding plan, right? So there's not a new concept plan that's binding on this one, right? They didn't submit anything.
That's correct. There's
Okay.
no new binding concept plan that would replace it, and so our evaluation is based on the most intense use.
Is that also because, so the original rezoning where the concept plan and the developer agreement was attached or binded, were both the properties involved in that? Or like, was there an application from them that started that process of having the concept plan and developer agreement part of that rezoning, and now they're not like together? Is that the deal? Is like, did they submit the application together before when this was done?
We don't have any evidence that both property owners submitted that application jointly.
So we can still go ahead and do binding concept plans on properties, even though one of them is not requesting it? Is that it? Is that true?
No, so
Okay.
I don't know that we would advise that to move forward currently in today's world, but 17 years ago, we could not find evidence of how that was imposed on
On
the two
both.
properties. The
Okay.
way that it was presented and with the research that we have done, the applicant was for the southernmost property. One thing that I did find is that there used to have been common ownership between those two properties prior to the application. So I don't know what type of plans were set up prior to the separation of ownership, prior to the application moving forward. That would be a question for the applicant.
Okay, all right. Member Grod.
A question for Chelsea. In my experience, what can occur has occurred. That you have a proposal 17 years ago that was provided and an act took place, an action took place, and there was a decision created and there was an ordinance created. That appears to me to make the point moot about if or could or should or may we want to bring the two pieces forward. The answer is you have a binding concept plan that effectively restricts development to that plan on that property. Whatever happened to have created it, the action of the creation, adoption of an ordinance occurred in a public meeting, public notice, everybody knew, everybody had a chance to object. No one did, it took effect. So in that, it remains in effect. Worrying about not having the two pieces represented, not combined in interest, it's moot to me. I don't know if you would agree, but it doesn't seem relevant. It is relevant to say you've got a plan, it's binding, you have ordinances that restrict it to what that plan shows without an amendment by another plan superseding that. Was that fair to think that way?
I can appreciate your thought process because yes, there was a public meeting. City Council did approve this concept plan. But I still have questions in my mind as to how it could have happened. And if another property were to, hypothesize through the same process, could I impose a concept plan on the adjoining property next to me without having them join in application? I don't know that I would advise City Council today to move forward with that course of action on a hypothesis type scenario. But looking back into what has happened here in the past is different from looking forward from how I would advise conduct of our current government. And so that being said, I can see it both ways.
As they say, hindsight's 20/20. So I thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I'll open the public hearing. Lori, we have any cards?
Yes, sir.
Or do we hear from the applicant? Is the applicant here first? Okay. All right, yeah, we can go ahead. Almost forgot that part.
Hi, I'm Mindy Mason. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Wendover Farms, Inc., and I appreciate all of your time, and we agree with the staff report.
Okay, any questions for the applicant's representative?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Perhaps you could explain or respond to an email correspondence, and I don't know if the person who authored that is here in the audience. I'll have to paraphrase what I recall it saying, but in short, they said that if you only grant the dissolution of the plan and you were to move forward with your client's ownership, back to the point of the aggregation versus non-aggregation, how do you feel conformance with the zoning requirement of lot frontage on an arterial and minimum lot width on an arterial is achieved on behalf of your client?
I would say I don't know how to answer that right now. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's quite okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll call cars and.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lori.
Randall Wilhite.
If you please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Randall Wilhite. I reside at 8082 Wendover Way in Titusville.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to address the Titusville Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm the president of the Wendover Farms Community Association, which is a different and distinct entity separate from Wendover Farms, Inc. Our HOA has 386 members that own 403 lots that come right up to the south side of the property addressed in this rezoning request. The members of the Wendover Farms Community Association are not unreasonable people. We're not intent on preventing development of the subject parcel of land. Excuse me. We are fully aware of the value of this land and its potential for future use as a regional commercial development. We support it. In fact, we're supportive of the owner's request to withdraw the binding development plan for the site. However, we specifically object to the comments of the planning staff concerning use of Wendover Way as a connector road to the primary arterial access road of State Route 50. Excuse me. Comprehensive Plan Policy 1.9.1, 1.9.9, and Sections 9.4 and 9.5 of the Development Review Procedures Manual concerning transportation infrastructure define the requirements for roadway access into high-density commercial developments. Those cited provisions require use of arterial or collector roadways as such access. By the definition set forth in Section 9 of the Land Development Review Procedures Manual, Wendover Way is defined as a local street with a 50-foot wide right-of-way and cannot be used as access to a regional commercial development. At the March 11th, 2025 meeting, the City Council unanimously opposed a similar modification to Policy 1.9.1. Yet here we are 8 days later with a proposal by the planning staff to ignore black letter policy and procedures to the detriment of surrounding communities. I and the members of Wendover Farms Homeowners Association respectfully request that the Planning and Zoning Commission reject the planning staff recommendations to ignore written policy concerning which roads can be used as access into regional commercial developments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question for them? Yeah.
I actually have, not for the applicant, but a question
Okay.
for
right.
staff, if I may. When,
That's okay. Thank you.
in your report, you mentioned that conforming standards have changed with ordinances and rules and land development code amendments. Has there been any analysis on the protection afforded this property site based on its approved binding? Was there any analysis that recognizes what codes were in effect when the binding plan was approved? And therefore, in your report, you say that whatever those rules were, they remain in effect. Subsequent amendments to rules don't affect the property because of the binding plan. as compared to what rules are in effect today on vacant property with no binding plan, and I came forward for development approval. Has there been any analysis of the plus and minus, the give and the take of the code changes as it would relate to the development of this property?
When you talk about the codes changing, are you talking about the developer's agreement that would have froze the LDRs at the time, or the concept plan that just binds the layout of the site?
Well, I'm taking for consideration the binding development plan. Illustrates the buildings and the site plan. And
The reason I ask is because the binding concept plan wouldn't necessarily freeze the regulations at the time. That's just freezing, establishing what the layout will look like. And so if the developer's agreement is what would bind the present day when the
yes, I understand. There isn't a developer's agreement on the
Correct.
property. There is a binding plan. That
Correct.
answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next card.
I have no other cards.
Okay. Would the applicant's representative need to want to rebuttal or anything? No? Okay. All right, well, I'll close, or is there any other question? Yeah, go, Mr. Grant.
For Eddie. You probably explained it and I was asleep at the time, but could you tell me again how Wendover Trail, which I believe is a local road, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Intersect and the Target Plaza, the the west end, intersects with Wendover Trail, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And the east side of Home Depot Plaza also. How is that legal?
There are a couple examples of that type of development pattern. We've got, for example, the Ford dealership and Lowe's are two properties that have frontage, have access onto an arterial, but also have access points onto local roads. And so there's that example, as you mentioned, and I mentioned previously, the Home Depot having access onto Ronald McNair Way and Wendover Trail.
Right.
And the Cracker Barrel west of 95 having frontage on 50, but both access points are onto Helen Hauser.
True.
And so those are several examples of how that type of development can occur. The recorded access easement to the north provides a connection to State Road 50. And so there's no nothing preventing an access point onto Wendover Way.
But it's not normal to do that, am I correct?
We've seen several examples of how that's.
Well, I agree with you, but it seems like we're throwing good money after bad, so to speak. It might be a bad way to put it, but we're committing the same error again if we.
I'm with the direction you're going.
So I'm just trying to understand that. Why was it done? I just can't see us doing it again if we want to stop it. But this bonding development plan is being thrown out, so we shouldn't even have to worry about that right now. Am I right? Any of this stuff.
Shouldn't have.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, but it could be in the future, depending on what type of project the owner decides to put there, right?
I'm not sure what your question is. I'm sorry.
Just doesn't seem right.
Mr. Grodd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the observations I recalled, I went and drove these streets. I believe these roads are maintained by the county as opposed to the city. Does that sound right? Thank you. And the comment the gentleman made regarding the 50-foot right-of-way, 50 feet of right-of-way can fit an urban section road and it can't fit a rural section. So you probably have drainage problems out there, I suspect. And the condition of that road at the intersection, as I mentioned, is not controlled. Now, be liberal and follow my lead. And I have mentioned this on other projects that have been proposed. One of the attributes I find about zoning is for the sake of it, when you create it, it's a pure thing. It's a color on a map, it's an identification lettering, it's this or it's that. It has no roadways, and it has no driveways, and it has no controlling devices. It's just pure essence. You come back and you have to fit what you've got into the rules. And if you cannot fit those into the rules, then you should not develop your land. Or you have to get rid of the rules and change them so that you can allow development. The saying about the cart and the horse would be my best analogy to this. You've got the property, it might be ripened for development 17 years later, assume it is, but it doesn't meet the threshold of the standards by which the actions that we would do to undo it would create, again, my comment, it's going to create an inconformity, a nonconformity. It's going to create potentially a violation. And I mentioned this just recently. It's the perfect setup. The answer is, well, I'll just get a variance. I mean, that's the answer, right? I don't have frontage on the arterial road like I'm supposed to, but I'll just get a variance. Who caused that to occur? I'd have to raise my hand and say, well, I approved it. I'm the P&Z member that recommended it. Why would I want to do that? And aggregating property in commercial development and the road system that's there, I would say if I were to wave a magic wand, you'd take out the service station with further aggregation of property. You would come back with a master plan. You'd have more accessibility onto the arterial road. You'd be east of the exit ramp. You'd be dealing with DOT for a right turn only. And you would probably, if I were seeing a magic wand, I would somehow try to figure out how I redevelop the roadway, expand it, create an intersection that's beneficial to the driving traffic. Or, this may sound like heresy, there are places where what the or is I close the road off and now the access goes to Wendover Trail. You improve that road to handle the increased volume of traffic if there really was any. I have a feeling most people use that route because it's very difficult to get out of that intersection or to get into it. I mean, you guys have been here longer than I have been, I think, and it just, I myself see this as an example where aggregating property, which has apparently been done, achieved by the plan, whether it was correct, incorrect, it was achieved. It tries to fit itself into the general theme, 200 feet of lot width on an arterial road with access from that road. If you undo it, you're not really doing a service to anybody. You're doing a disservice because now you've created a nonconformity. And if you don't get a variance, the answer is you don't develop your land or you change the code. And I don't think you want to change the code for regional commercial to have access on a local street. That just didn't make any sense to me. So that's just my thoughts on this. Thank you.
Okay, procedurally, I'm going to close the public hearing. And go ahead, Member Faison.
Well, I was going to have one more question for the applicant.
Well,
Because this is, I know, and I apologize, because this is a mess, right? And so her question or their question to remove the current restrictions there, to what end, to what purpose? Because as you said, the best thing would be if they own the gas station, but they don't. So what is the purpose of removing that to what end? Because all it's doing is making a bigger mess. So how do they plan on using this mess? How would this benefit them in doing this? Because it's not working. So if you can kind of tell us how would this benefit you to help let us understand why this is even being done, because it's just making a bigger mess.
I think,
if you come to the podium, please. Thank you.
I apologize, I don't know too much to answer, so I would say right now is just having that removed so they can move on to try and potentially develop it into something. As of right now, where it has the restrictions on it, it's almost impossible to develop it, so.
But it gets even more impossible to remove them. So I don't understand how removing it makes it better versus what it's there now, because removing it makes it even worse. So if you can let us know how you plan to use, I don't want to know what you're building on that later, but but right now, traffic is the big thing, right?
Right.
Because under the old plan, the community came out and was up in arms about traffic. And as you hear, that's what the problem is today, is traffic. So at least with the other parcel, you have access to 50. So when we remove it, you no longer have access to 50, And now you're gonna ask us, not you, but
Right.
now you're left with just simply that one access to Wendover Way, which will be a problem again. And we're probably, getting that approved, probably, it's gonna be an issue. So help us understand what the thought process is and how you're gonna combat the traffic, because I know that you guys are pretty much aware that there's a traffic issue.
Correct.
All right, so let's talk to that. How do you guys plan on circumventing the traffic issue by putting commercial in a place that doesn't allow it?
I can't answer that right now, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right,
I could get back to you.
sounds good
Okay.
to me.
All right, thank you. Any more public hearing stuff? All right, I'll close the public hearing. Unless, well,
I'm sorry, there was a letter submitted.
okay.
I just wanted to make sure that.
From Sandy Clear,
I'm sorry?
from Sandy?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank-
I think I sent that also to Chelsea. I think I got 2 emails from her that I sent to Chelsea. Which we've kind of, I think you covered the first one, and then, I don't know if the other one's been talked about. I think it was kind of mentioning the same stuff in a second email, but, close the public hearing, and any other discussion with the commission? Any questions for staff besides maybe what I have? So Eddie, I think what you said though is part of the LDR for this type of development is that you have to have frontage on an arterial road. But what you're saying is since there's a road that goes up 250, that's considered frontage to an arterial road?
There is not a road to State Road 50, but there is a recorded access easement that would provide access from the
So you're saying
subject
that
property.
easement is the frontage, but if the property to the north, all right, so what we're talking about though is the property directly on 50, that's where the easement's through, right? But that property is not part of the 2 properties that had the binding agreement on it, or is it?
It was shown on the concept plan, but the ordinances that changed the zoning only applied to the subject property, which did not include the property
The
adjacent to
south
State
of,
Road 50.
of it, so, okay. So you're saying that since they have that easement there, they would have frontage on the arterial road still, okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
wouldn't tonight's action, if approved, would sever that, and they would no longer have access on their own property to 50?
No, so the recorded easement would not go away with the removal of the binding concept plan.
No, but I mean, but that's to the property to the north. Would the property to the south still have access through the property to the north? Basically, would it still be in aggregate properties, was what I'm asking.
So they're not currently aggregated. They're owned by 2 separate owners, the north property and the south property.
Right.
There is currently a recorded access easement connecting the south property through the north property
through.
to State Road 50.
Okay, I didn't, we went through the north property, okay.
Yeah, so like both properties below, or no, yeah, because there's only one property below that north part. All right, okay.
Okay.
Midburger.
And that,
The way I'm looking at this, and I'm maybe reiterating my point, the pureness of painting a map in zoning colors is that someone comes and puts in the pieces on the colors. In this instance, it appears to me that there's really no good way to develop regional commercial in this property because of the geometry and the location of existing roadways. You have an interstate system they cannot take access to. You have an exit ramp. I'm not even sure that when I looked at this the last time through, I questioned whether the exit ramp was in the right-of-way of Highway 50 or whether it was in the right-of-way I-95. And if it's in the right-of-way I-95, I remember I asked the question, and the response from the applicant at that time was, well, DOT considers it to be the same. FDOT controls I-95 and FDOT controls 50. I won't put it on the record. I know that's incorrect, but I suspect that that may not be completely correct. Access to Interstate 95 is not just going to be through the state of Florida's Department of Transportation. It's going to take Federal Highway Administration review of that. So I would say the conclusion is you're not going to get access to I-95. And my point was, I think the exit ramp, when they created the right-of-way of I-95, it was rock, paper, and scissors. There was no right-of-way for I-95 in the 60s. They acquired it. They condemned it, and they built a road. When that condemnation went over top of Highway 50 and they created the ramps, The $64,000 question is, are the ramps the right-of-way acquisition of I-95, a federal highway? Or is it just Highway 50, an arterial road? And I don't believe that's correct. I think the access is not going to be through that exit ramp within the right-of-way I-95. But the aggregated plan, which tries to conform and comport to the standards in effect 17 years ago, remains conforming to the standards today because it has the access purportedly on the arterial road 50 with the booger of a question. Whatever FDOT's going to say, we don't know. 17 years later, we still don't know. Maybe it'd be like the JFK papers. We can get it released so we'll all know what happened back all those years ago. So when I spoke about that, I still maintain picturing how would I take these puzzle parts and create conformity with good meaning, create safe conformity with good access. There's only one word that defines it. It's aggregation of property. Somebody has to go make an offer, make a purchase price, buy the parcels, come forward with a new binding plan or under a PUD perhaps that illustrates how I'm able to conform. I would even go further to say I would see it be that the burden of development of that site is very likely to be the total improvement of the existing roadway that goes to Wendover Farm. And that's why I mentioned including such a, I hate to be out there on the wilds, but it could even mean the closure of that road for access so it becomes essentially a driveway to a regional commercial shopping center. And if you'll turn to page 46 on your agenda and look at the aerial photograph, I mentioned the configuration of the restaurant west of 50, which I think is a Cracker Barrel, and Helen Hauser Boulevard. I don't know how that all came about, but I look at that as what I just stated. There was an aggregation of properties that created a potential conformity by the development of a correct roadway to serve those commercial sites. If you look at this and look on the east side of I-95, I see the same picture. And I see the picture clearly illustrating better conformity with rules under the binding plan. Separating that stuff out, all due respect, making a marketability is not to the benefit of the public. The rules that are in place are to the benefit of the public. Controlling access, meeting those standards, dealing with this as a separation of the plan and leaving it to be potentially, well, I'll need a variance. That's my statement on it, not theirs. This isn't serving the public the right purpose. That's my thought.
Okay. I think I remember from the last time too that I think the developer said that they contacted FDOT and they said, and FDOT said that more than likely they wouldn't, allow, access there. But then some of the citizens called FDOT and they said, well, what if they don't have any other way to get on there except for that, because the only other option is a local road. And according to their testimony, that the FDOT representative said that they would probably consider that if, like, as a hardship. So if they have a hardship and they have no other way, then they would allow access on to 50. But yeah, I don't know where that stands. I don't know if that's important or not, but okay. Yeah, I'm never facing.
I think at this point, Mr. Garrett has given the answers away. He's not supposed to help the students out here, but here he is giving great information. Because that really is the only way to make that site usable, especially at the capacity that they want to use it. Again, by the gas station, close off the road, by the road, no problems. But that's not the case today. So today we're here to talk about the aggregate property as it stands and whether or not that one access road through the south property, through the north property, onto Cheney Highway is sufficient enough to say, yes, this meets the need. And I think that's where we are today, right? That's the question. That's the question of the day, right? Does that access supposedly access through from the southern property through the north property onto 50? Does that constitute access to an arterial road enough to handle the traffic? And does it meet the need? And I was told today that we don't know.
That's covered.
Remember Drive.
One more question, I guess, for staff. Within the land use designation, are there less intense commercial development zoning districts that do not require access standards like the regional commercial.
So if I understand your question, are there other zoning districts that could be requested under the current commercial high-intensity future land use designation that would not have locational criteria?
That would not require the direct access onto an arterial road. That's the standard that is the most important for having the picture of a mall. I guess regional commercial envisions a mall with a two-lane road going to an arterial road, as opposed to all the traffic to a mall coming down a local street. Is there another zoning district that wouldn't require access to an arterial road? In my mind, would envision a less intense but compliant zoning district potentially within that land use designation.
So some of the other zoning districts that would be permitted in the commercial high intensity include the hospital medical, T tourist, neighborhood commercial, community commercial, regional commercial, and OP. The locational criteria is going to be different for all of those. I believe at least the tourist is a little more flexible. So there are other options for zoning districts, yes, but the binding concept plan would have to be removed through the rezoning process.
Certainly, and I understand that. That was the point of the question. I appreciate you pointing that forward, is that in a turn of events, had the applicant said, look, I know I can't meet the criteria for access on arterial road, and it's questionable whether I can even aggregate the plan's constitution because it wasn't put together in the same puzzle pieces at the same time. So what I want to do is lessen the intensity of the zoning potential, not require direct access on an arterial road, and change the zoning so that I can accomplish that. That certainly would be an alternative to, I can't develop my land because of the plan. But that's not before us. It is certainly an option and certainly ought to be considered. Maybe perhaps that is where it ends up. We've already talked about this same property twice in 1 year, I believe, and it always comes back to that access issue based on intensity. I think the last one's multiple family that the concern was, and the trip generation from residential was going to be enormously different than commercial.
Member Faison.
And then my last question, and again, this may not be for commercial, but I remember there was some zoning criteria, zoning allowance, that if you were so many feet from the arterial road, that would be allowable. Am I wrong? Do you remember what we're talking about? Again, and it may be something totally different, and I could be completely off, but I remember there was something that it could be on a collector road if it was so many feet from an arterial road. Do you remember that
I think it
one?
was like 1,000 feet. He was talking about, I can't remember. What did he say? I think he mentioned it
So
today.
are you maybe talking about the note number 1 for regional commercial zoning district that says must have frontage on an arterial or higher classification thoroughfare and be located within 1,320 feet of an intersection of at least a collector road and the required frontage road?
Yeah,
Okay, so that's the locational criteria for regional commercial.
gotcha. Okay, all right.
I was gonna say something else and I remember now. I was gonna say that I think I'd feel more comfortable if there was a new binding, a new agreement, a new concept plan, because this is such a strange piece of property of where it's located that I just don't see it making sense unless we have a binding agreement on it. All right, any other discussion or motion on this rezoning? Member Faison.
Move that we deny rezoning of number 1-20525 Wendover Farms, Cheney Highway.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Yes, Chelsea.
Can you expand upon your motion as to the basis for the denial?
Yes, so when I asked applicant about what are their plans, because if we did remove the current,
In the succinct motion format.
Not a garage
Don't
format.
be like me.
Yeah, not a garage format.
all right, so I move that we deny rezoning of number 1-2025 Wendover Farms, Cheney Highway on the basis of that there is no clear path forward to utilization of that property once this has been approved.
Can you reference any codes or reference points as to the basis for your denial?
Would it help to mention that we talked about the conformity to access on the property and conformity to lot width on the zoning district, and that separation and disillusionment of the plan would create at least a nonconformity issue and present a violation of the rule upon adoption of the change?
So stated.
Yes.
We have a motion and a sec, or did we have a second? Did we have a second? Oh, yeah, that's right. We did have a second. We have a motion and a second. Roll call, all right, roll call vote.
Secretary Grant,
No, because I don't understand it.
Just to confirm, that means you're voting against the motion to deny.
That's right.
okay. Member Faison,
Yes?
Vice Chairman Childs,
Yes.
Member Scully,
Yes.
Member Grodd,
Yes.
Okay. That will go before city council, what, next week? They're on Thursday next week, aren't, that's a weird date, isn't it?
They adjusted the meeting
is it?
schedule because several of the city council members are going to be out of town doing legislative days at Tallahassee, and so they asked for the meeting to be rescheduled to Thursday, the 27th.
So it'll be Thursday, 27th, right? Yeah,
And the public hearing for the item will be held on April 8th.
okay. Oh, so it's first reading at city council next week and then public hearing. Okay, April 8th. All right. Next item is petitions and requests from the public present. Anyone want to speak during this one? No card required. Okay. All right. Reports from the city staff.
No report, sir. Thank you. Great job chairing the meeting.
Thanks. City attorneys. All right. Me. I don't know. Yeah, it's been great. Chairman A-Time was not available because he's on spring break, probably in Panama City or somewhere. But it was a pleasure taking over for him. It's a good short meeting this time. It's great. Any other reports from members?
I would like to just give everybody advice. I've repeat myself, but on April 2nd, 12 o'clock till 1:30 at www.1000friendsoflorida.com, they're going to give a legislative update, speaking of the council members going to Tallahassee. And I certainly would suggest take an opportunity to watch it at lunchtime. It's always some interesting information coming out of the legislative meetings right now.
True. Any other reports? Okay, we stand adjourned then. Thank you.